everyone, and welcome back to the Product Tales podcast. Today, I'm excited to chat with Christina Baldarelli, a brilliant product leader and startup advisor. Christina joined Mobi, an online ordering platform for restaurants, during New Zealand's COVID lockdown and played a key role in scaling it as demand skyrocketed overnight. She then joined Kogo, a climate tech company, where she rose from product manager to chief product officer in record time, scaling the team from 30 to 120 people and taking the product global. Now she works with startups as a fractional CPO, helping founders solve tough product and scaling challenges. In this episode, we explore Christina's journey, some common pitfalls of scaling products globally, how to approach localizing software for international markets, and aligning product with business strategy during hypergrowth. But before we dive in, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Dummy. Dummy is a Chrome extension that helps product teams create instant, one-click bug reports with video replay and technical info, making it super easy to share and solve software issues fast when you're testing software. Click the link on the show notes to get started for free today, or go to dummy.com. That's dummi.com. Hi, Christina. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, really well, Julia. Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. What initially sparked your interest in tech, and how did you transition from international relations to product?
Yeah, my entry into product was quite unconventional, to the extent that I'm literally giving a talk later this week about how unconventional it was at the Product Aotearoa conference. I was non-technical for my whole early career. I was very intimidated by all things technical. Even I got a fine arts degree and avoided any sort of digital media entirely. Like the whole thing was just really intimidating to me. So I was working for a university here in New Zealand, and everything that they did was totally bespoke, and they really prided themselves on that. We were basically taxed with internationalization and bringing revenue in. So we were bringing in groups of international people for short courses. It just was a lot of work because everything was so tailored. And I just kept wondering, maybe because I'm originally from California, have sort of a, built-in commercial awareness. I just wondered if we might do something a bit different. But all of my suggestions to kind of like package something up and sell it were really unpopular. And the term that they really didn't like was build it and they will come. So we don't do build it and they will come type of things. And it was a real dirty word. It was sort of like looked down upon, very generic. But finally we tried one and, basically did some market research, put a program together, marketed it really widely. And it grew like 30x in a couple of years. So it really took off. And it ended up having the online, portal component. And I had to work with, sort of the IT team at the university who, worked in a little closet, and it was not a core part of the business. But yeah, through that experience, I kind of got this rush of like, whoa, not only can we build something, that's cool. Like I never thought about actually, doing that kind of thing before, but also like the power of not being at the grassroots, the power of actually being one step removed and just kind of building something that can serve lots of people, like really got me hooked. And that's what led me to pivot, or even, consider the possibility that I could pivot into tech.
You actually had a startup as the first product role that you've ever had. Tell me more about that. How did you end up starting a business, and what led you to that, and how was that experience?
Yeah, it's probably a testament to like my shyness that I was ready to pivot into tech, but I was too, I wasn't sure how to like approach anyone. So I did a startup.
The hardest thing.
Because it felt easy to me because it happened to be at a time where I was on maternity leave. So I sort of had some time, but I didn't really know anybody else who had that kind of time. And sorry to all the parents who didn't have a lot of time. I had a baby that slept a lot. So I found myself, a lot of time stuck on a couch with a laptop and maybe one hand to type with. And I did some research and put some ideas together, and just through sort of an organic process of networking, looking for events to go to, I found a startup accelerator. So I kind of went directly in basically at idea stage to an accelerator called the Lightning Lab. And went through this really intensive, basically design thinking 101, and took an idea from, the very beginning to building a team to doing all that fun early stuff, market validation, customer discovery, launching an MVP. It was all so exciting. Yeah, so I mean, I learned it's the first time that I ever had any sort of words to put to concepts, like actually calling something problem discovery, instead of just waffling away at it. Ultimately, the startup, we sort of took a running leap and floated for a bit, but we didn't get that, lift off trajectory. That's all good. And that kind of came down to just now I sort of see it as a horse race where like you've got the product, but you've also got the business and you can't let one get too far ahead of the other. So we focused completely on product, and I just didn't know anything about the fundamentals of starting a business yet, so like anything from a financial model to actually talking to the team about shares, that completely lagged. But I came out of it kind of understanding the words and process and, fundamentals of how to build a product, and that stuck with me.
Yeah, you really dived head first into this experience.
At one point somebody said, "Oh, nobody starts a startup, for flexibility." And I actually had, because I thought, I had been working for quite an employer that wasn't very flexible with hours or working from home or, what we worked on or anything like that. So I saw it as a chance to, kind of make my own destiny. So it was I didn't really perceive it as the most extreme step, but it turns out that it definitely was. But I think that's a misconception that a lot of people bring coming in, that you can kind of do it as a side hustle. And then, it's hard to go all in.
100%. And what do you think is the most surprising lesson you learn about building products in that environment?
This is in retrospect because now it seems really obvious, but the really surprising thing to me at the time was, I pictured a startup that people say 0 to 1. I thought it would have a start and a finish. Like once we build it, we'll just be, out there. But what my biggest discovery, that I've really kind of tried to hold on to is how iterative it is. Like how you start early, and it's almost more like a snowball rolling down a hill, that like you have to start it rolling in order for it to kind of grow and become something. And that's through, the conversation with the market, that kind of thing. So that was a completely new way of looking at things. And I, like a lot of people who start out, really just thought it was all about like you go away into a dark room, you build something for a while, and then you launch it. And then, it's sort of like phase 1, phase 2, but it's really not like that. Like it's a constant cycle. And that blew my mind.
Yeah, I can definitely see how sometimes it's easy in product to think, hey, this is the thing that I want to build. I'm just going to go away and build it, and that's it, and then they will come build it, and then they will come, how you're saying at the beginning. But I think that it is definitely an iterative process. And then after that experience, you started at Mobi working in their product team. So tell me more about that experience.
Yeah, it was a really unique experience. And like I'm grateful for it because if you've watched any sort of like, consumed any media that kind of, you know, really glorifies or really exaggerates that startup experience where you're like sleeping under your desk and it's usually a bunch of 20-year-old dudes who are eating a lot of pizza or something, like that was that experience for me. But it's not just because it was growing so fast. It was growing so fast because I started in like the first week of the COVID lockdown here in New Zealand. We had, pretty intense level 4 lockdown where nobody left their house, and it was really wild. And it happens that what Mobi does is online ordering for restaurants. And they had been doing that for years. They didn't jump on the bandwagon. They had a small team. They had been ticking along, bringing new customers on, maybe 1 or 2 a week. And all of a sudden overnight, every restaurant in the world needs online ordering. So in the beginning, I wasn't even on the product team. My neighbor came to the gate 3 meters away and was like, "I heard your startup failed. Do you need work? Like, we need help." And it was all hands on deck. So literally the CEO, me, the HR, everybody was just they were just on the phone with restaurants trying to help them get onto the platform so that they could take online orders. Because again, like their onboarding wasn't really set up at that scaling level. At that stage, I still didn't even know the word product. So I just joined to like help out. And for me, having come from a background in sort of quite very purpose-led nonprofits, that kind of thing, I would have done it for free because, in that mentality of early pandemic, like it just felt like we were powerless. We were stuck at home and it was something that I could do. So I was like, hell yes, I'll come, I'll do whatever you need. By then I had enough experience that I could kind of do one of everything. And I finally, once I knew everybody's name and, it was a few weeks in and I kind of looked around and realized that there were a few people who seemed to be like really piecing things together, making a little bit of sense in the chaos. And I learned that they called themselves the product team. And even though I had been through this accelerator and gone through all the design thinking principles, in a startup accelerator, you don't talk about who's in customer success, who's in product, who's an account executive. Like that jargon comes in a slightly bigger company. It was only until I observed what they were doing and the fact that they called themselves the product team where I was sort of like, whoa, these are my people. Like that they're doing the things that I like doing. But it was, none of it was textbook growth because it was such an intense situation. But I think what I took away to the next company that was also growing really fast was just around like having to be adaptable. You had to be really, really comfortable with that because there were definitely people who were, had been used to spending a week designing something and having many, many, many iterations of feedback with really key people. And there was no time for that. And people really struggled from that.
You had a very unique experience that not all startups have, where you have massive, crazy demand.
Yeah.
And no time to prepare. When you guys went and tried to improve the product to maintain retention, what were some of the key lessons that you learned? Because that would have been really interesting to try to backtrack what you should have technically usually done at the beginning.
I think my focus tended to be pretty commercial. So I'm sure that there's a lot that we could have done, in a more technical level in terms of, architecture, processes, that kind of thing. But something that really impacted the product specifically for retention was that because the market grew so fast, our ambition to go to new markets was very easily satisfied. It was really easy to launch in new markets. It was really easy to have, businesses in Ireland, businesses, all over the world asking for our services. But that soon meant we had a stream of, wants and needs and feature requests and prioritization coming from all these different markets. So when you're looking at retention and you're trying to, solve the most valuable next problem, that was different for most markets. And it was also different for, different customer segments. So, whereas they probably wouldn't have hoped to all of a sudden attract a lot of really big enterprise customers pre-COVID, they were one of the major players that, during the pandemic. So all of a sudden there's these big fish and they're throwing their weight around like, well, yeah, we'll pay you that, no problem, but we're going to need this feature. We're going to need that feature. So that made it really hard for retention in terms of actually being able to keep all the businesses because you're trying to grow the product. So service, goes down a bit because you're spending time on, building new features, chatting to startup founders now who are like, oh, I think we'll go to the UK. I'm like, wait, think about it first because it's not just a small issue. But yeah, I think that was the main thing, especially from that commercial lens, where you're working in a startup that at that point probably had 100 people. So not tiny, but still quite small, really having to, contend with some very strong sales and marketing and customer success forces within the company who kind of all want different things. Made it really hard to build a product that had good retention across the board.
So how did you end up deciding then which features to prioritize? Did you decide to go with the enterprise customers because they're paying more? Or did you say, oh, well, we'll just build this feature, which is kind of what everyone wants, but not really what everyone really wants? Or yeah, how did you then go about making that decision?
At the time, so the company was still quite founder-led, and we had, the product practice was emergent. So there are sort of two things happening at once, which probably made it a little bit harder. The first thing was that, as it had always been, like that high-level strategy was being done, at sort of the exec team level, which was led by the founder, and that really had a pull to enterprise. And that also has something to do with fundraising, where you're looking at targets and you've got existing investors and there's an opportunity. It would be really hard to resist that gravitational pull. At the same time, we had this emergent product team where we were sort of starting to learn about prioritization and learn about, collecting our insights and doing good analytics. There was no data team at all at the time. So, it was just up to us to sort of put them in one place and try to read the tea leaves, really, try to find a heat map. We didn't have any tools, it was just down to trying to collect things on a big Trello board and see patterns. That was tricky because we'd start to see patterns. We had a massive customer base of small business owners, and you start to see real patterns of opportunity there. But that's kind of running into the more enterprise, commercial ambition. So in that case, the company did pivot to enterprise, having the trade-off that we didn't really have the capability to serve a lot of the smaller requests. Things shifted strategically to enterprise, where it was more around building sort of a professional services team to be able to work with these, massive tech teams within a large hospitality group, that kind of thing. So it definitely had a trade-off and a custom churn for sure in that small business space, which commercially, in the scheme of things wasn't a huge impact, but it definitely kind of changed the direction of the company.
So you're not only dealing with different markets, but you're dealing with different types of customers at the same time and trying to piece it all together.
It was a buffet. I mean, and sales has never been so easy since then. So on one hand, that's good because that makes you really strategic about what's a good customer, who do you want to spend time on? And definitely, to the company's credit, they were strategic and said, our time is best spent with these big enterprise customers because it takes a bit to win them and they want a lot, but it has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stores, and we struck with one point of contact and then are working with all these locations versus a mom and pop cafe down the road where you work with them. They have a lot of questions and that's only one store. So it makes sense. But again, very different operating model that I don't think we fully appreciated when we kicked into that gear.
I guess it means also that product is very closely tied to the commercial decisions that you're making, right?
Yeah.
You've worked with a lot of companies now expanding internationally and scaling to different markets. What's one mistake that's guaranteed to come back to bite a startup if they make it when they're expanding internationally? And how do you think that they can avoid it?
I think it goes back to just going for too many markets too fast. That's going to introduce a stream of priorities that is potentially going to conflict with your existing streams of priorities. That's not necessarily a bad thing if it's a good opportunity, but it has a trade-off that now, okay, you decided to launch in Europe. You're going to put some effort into it. You're going to really try to capture a certain market share. That has a trade-off now for your APAC sales team. Once you multiply that to a few different geographies, if there isn't general understanding that, hey, this is the plan, these are going to be the trade-offs, that can just create a lot of chaos. And in my experience, this is talking B2B, in my experience, that can really sort of weigh heaviest on the product team if there isn't that strategic understanding. And I've worked with some amazing sales teams who kind of try to work together to find the Venn diagram of most valuable features. That's usually included the product team trying to, facilitate that process. But at the end of the road, especially in a smaller company where resources are scarce, that can just really lower the tide for all boats, rather than actually helping everybody at the same time, if it were done strategically.
That's fascinating. So I guess what you're saying is if you haven't finished building your product in a certain region, or to an extent that is mature enough to move on, you move on too fast to too many regions, then you're trying to basically make sure that all these different branches of your product are mature.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And you've made the perfect distinction, because all of this is assuming that we're probably not quite at product market fit in any of these markets. So that's to really underscore, and thanks for highlighting that I think it's especially a risk when you're below that product market fit threshold, which can be tricky if you're working, if your target is a really big customer. There's only so much you can do in a given market. There's only so much you can iterate toward product market fit when, let's say there's only 10 of your target customer in a single market, and those sales cycles are really long. How can you even iterate to that product market fit? So, sometimes you have to spread the net a little bit to different geographies.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's your best advice for a startup that is trying to still figure out what's the best market to go into? And so you don't want to overcommit to any given market, but at the same time, you can't just not build product and you have to keep making product decisions. How do you kind of navigate that? And is it best to just go with a market, regardless if it's the best market, and focus on that first? Or is it better to try to keep your options open?
That's a really hard question. I think it comes down to just being decisive about what is the plan. So, I mean, worst case scenario, you spray and pray. You don't really know what you were trying, you're just, again, like a solution looking for a problem. You're just throwing it out there. It's definitely to be somewhat intentional. But I mean, I work with a lot of founders. Their MVP is just about ready and they're trying to figure out where to launch. If you feel like your product is almost ready to launch, well, then surely those go-to-market motions have been built in to the design of the product. So, it's sort of like, it starts with like, where do you even decide where to do your early customer discovery? It can't really be a question that you ask at the time of, we're ready to press go. So assuming that you're doing it from the start, I think it's great to have a hypothesis of a few potential markets, do some really early discovery, have a bit of a prototype out in a couple markets. But I think at some point, the ROI of spreading out is really damaging if you're too wide. So at some point, you have to use the data you've got. Look at what you've learned. Hopefully, you've got a few different options where you've either prototyped or at least done some discovery. Take your data, make your best decision, give it a go. Hopefully, you've also overlaid that with some, market analysis of the size of the opportunity, so you can actually go and do some testing and learning. It just comes down to sort of doing some initial legwork, being decisive, but, knowing what you're doing and focusing on it.
Yeah, for sure. After Mobi, you moved on to being a product manager to then a CPO at Kogo. Do you want to tell me more about that transition, and what have you learned while you were there, and has that experience changed your approach to product strategy?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I had a real fun time at Kogo. Again, like, it's so amazing to be able to work for a purpose-led organization where everybody has sort of come with some degree of shared values. So that was, again, a pretty unique situation. And I think the impact of that is also felt when you're working at different levels, because you do just have a general sense of shared purpose, which pays some dividends when it comes time to, working together, collaborating, that kind of thing. Having said that, I think I might have been like the only person who ever said on my like employee feedback form where it said, how do you feel about the advancement opportunities here? And I wrote too fast, because I had sort of landed after this like whirlwind growth at Mobi. I was like, okay, cool. Like, Kogo's got an established product team. I'm so excited to go and kind of like just be a bit more like, have lots of colleagues who are really smart and know what to do, and they've been doing it for a while and whatever. So I was really excited to kind of really like, I don't know, like be in the trenches for a while. And I totally was, but like typical startups, when you're growing, there's just always potential growth for roles. So I moved up to head of product, and then I was the acting CPO. Obviously, like, time in the trenches affects how you do strategy when you have that recency, because you've got a really fresh understanding of actual challenges on the ground, actual dynamics on the ground. Something that really surprised me once I was in that kind of C-suite exec level was just how hard it was to get visibility of like the actual conflicts or, clashes of priority or, disagreements, like things that are really healthy in a company. For example, the product and sales is always like, hey, we want more features. No, we can't. But, really common things that are built into this company. Like, you should have all this healthy tension, but it was really hard to see it at that level. And if I didn't have that sort of very recent experience in those trenches, I wouldn't have even known that it was there, because, conventionally, the way that reporting works is, this manager goes, oh, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. What's on your radar? Any challenges I can help with? Like, kind of only everything gets filtered as it shifts up. And at that high level, it's really hard to do strategy when you don't know that, oh, this sales team is really upset because we're not building any of the features that that we need in order to launch in Japan. We need to do a bunch of localization, that kind of thing. So it really just helps to kind of try to build in much more transparent lines of communication. And even just the idea of, like I'm a big good strategy, bad strategy fan. We've got this sort of framework of, like what's working, what's not working, what should we do? What's a general idea of how we should get there? Okay, let's break it down. So even just like putting a formal strategy framework on things is helpful, because it's like, okay, if we're going to talk about our unfair advantages, we need to go and do the work and talk to the team to figure out, where are we seriously crushing it? If we're going to talk about our real Achilles heel, like we do have to actually go and talk to people and get some nominations for that. So I think just, putting that label on it makes it a bit easier to do the digging. But I wouldn't have even known that how necessary that was, having not been kind of deep in the trenches. So that's a tricky one for leaves.
How many employees were there when you were at Kogo, just so everyone has an idea of the scale?
Yeah, so again, at this point we had probably grown, it was maybe 30 people when I arrived, and it had grown to about 120. So this is a similar story where you're going from, core team in New Zealand, building product and, starting to launch locally, but then they had well established in the UK at that point. So had like a very strong sales and customer success and even an executive presence in the UK.
Yeah, especially also when you're building product and you're growing as a team and you're adding more people to the product team. How did you find that the product team kind of evolved over time as the transition from 30 to 120? And did you start splitting up into different niches? How did that work?
Yeah, it can make it so hard, especially during growth, because like, you see a picture of the org chart, but then like a few months later, it's a completely different picture. My key takeaway was that, to stay adaptable and try to make it really clear that things are going to change. But it was really challenging. Like, for example, during that growth, at different times, there would be sort of teams based on specialization. Like, here's the research team, here's the product team, here's the design team, marketing, etc. And then at other times, you'd have sort of cross-functional squads with, a product manager and a designer and a researcher, and those work very different ways. And then there was sort of every combination in between where you sort of had your squad, but your reporting line was back to your sort of functional manager and things. So sort of tried lots of different things. I really like this concept of like your first team, like where's your home base that you have your most trusting and most valuable work relationships. And when you're growing and changing a lot, and your first team sort of feels like it's changing. For example, if you're a designer, you might have had this really, really beautiful, safe nest with all the other designers. And then we decide to change models, and we're doing cross-functional now. And, now that you're the only designer on a cross-functional team, I would probably argue, because I was a product manager, that works best, because it's really nice to, have your regular morning cup of coffee with the people who are doing the same work as you. But at the same time, it could feel really isolating because, you're the only one kind of representing your craft. I think when you're at that size, it's just really important that everybody knows that it will change, and not to get too rooted down into a certain way, because you do have to kind of experiment, especially when you're across time zones.
Totally. I can relate to the time zones.
We know, yeah. Thanks for calling during your night.
Tell me a little bit about like the best composition of a product team. What are the roles that I absolutely need, in your opinion, for a well-functioning product team in a startup?
Yeah, I know that there's a ton of different ways to do this, and I think everything flows up to the different system that it's in, right? And like, what's the organizational model? So disclaimer, there's lots of right ways to do it. If I had to whack up a product team right now, I don't know if I would have separate humans doing everything, but I would want to make sure that across the team, across some collection of people, we had definitely certain spikes, and a single person can sometimes like spike in two areas. So that would be fine. But I definitely want spikes, in that design area, The smartest people I've ever worked with are all the product designers that I've worked with. They just do so much of that work to actually bring the ideas into action and do that rapid prototyping. And without being able to lean on that, it would be really hard for the rest of the team to do what I would call, good product. So definitely somebody who's able to spike in that design area. Also, UX research, somebody who knows the fundamentals of talking to people and pulling insights and articulating those and connecting them. Sometimes those are the same person, those last two, but sometimes they're not. It's amazing if you have the luxury of it being, multiple people. I would want to have a spike in that commercial space. So somebody who actually understands the business model, the sales team, and can empathize with what's happening in the rest of the company. And then that product management function, which again, those two sometimes can be combined, but sometimes not. Sometimes you have a design person who's really marketing adjacent, and they're the ones who really understand, the market and what's going on out there. And then ideally, you've got some sort of tech lead or somebody who's able to spike in that technical area and do the tech discovery, or at least be a really good interface with a development team. So I really like to have a tight cross-functional team that's kind of dedicated to one outcome. And I love for that to be just embedded into the, even into the small squad of engineers. But again, it's all based on what I've seen and what I enjoy working in.
So what I'm hearing is spike in design, spike in UX research, spike in product manager, spike in somebody that can understand the commercial implications of the product that you're building, and then somebody that has the technical skills to technically validate and then translate what the product stuff that you're doing to the developers. That all sounds really good. And then what you're saying is if you have a bigger team, maybe you have different clusters of these smaller cohorts of people working in different projects. Is that right?
Yeah. And that's definitely something that I've played with to some really cool effects, because then you all share the success of that new launch. You all share the success of that feedback coming in. And it's just a good experience. I think as long as at that, at whatever higher level, you've done it in a way that makes sense so that people aren't sort of competing for either real estate in the product or, resources in terms of access to customers, it's got to work within an operating model. But I think that could be really nice. I'm not sure how it would work in a much bigger company. And I don't know, I hope I never find out.
Fair enough. So going back to the topic of startups, you now work really closely with early stage founders as a fractional co-founder or CPO. Can you share with us what that is, what that looks like? How do you work with these companies?
It's so broad, and it just kind of started not by accident, but when I was working for Kogo, I was helping a few, just personal contacts were doing startups, and they didn't have that product hat. So I would help out ad hoc with, the product side of things. Often that was just having a chat and bouncing ideas off and challenging some things or asking questions. And that can sometimes be, the most valuable thing of just getting people to think about who's going to use it, for example, is a really good product. Oh, that's cool. Who's going to pay for it? So that just kind of
it's a good point.
It's a really frequent question, unfortunately. That just started, as a personal hobby. But then I really enjoyed it. It really lit my fire. I loved it. So it's using all the first principles, using all the kind of skills and concepts that come with that product thinking, but unencumbered by any of the bureaucracy or frameworks and, just, are we doing good product, bad? Who cares? Let's get these outcomes done using these skills. So it was just sort of a really free way to kind of unleash the skills really creatively. So that led me to actually go out on my own and work. So I do sort of two different things. I work just one-on-one with companies on kind of a consulting basis. And that often can look a bit more like a fractional CPO. So it could be things like helping them hire a more permanent team. So there's a company that I'm helping right now to kind of do the setup and hire for a CTO and a CPO. So like that, that's not going to be me, but I'll get them to the point where they'll know what they need and how to find, and I'll help them find the right one. And that's setting up a lot of groundwork just for them to be able to like describe their systems and practices in a way that people will sort of be able to identify with and select into or not. With other companies, it could be that those really early product things around framing a value proposition in relation to what they've learned about a customer, rather than just describing a solution, just the idea of bringing that into a value proposition. And then doing that kind of early testing and learning, talking to people, and actually doing the problem discovery where you even know what to reflect. I always say, like, your description of the solution should reflect their description of their problem. So even just being able to get that on a page to know how do these people perceive their problem? How does it impact them? So really early bread and butter kind of stuff like that. And then I also work through an organization called the Ministry of Awesome that is a small nonprofit that delivers, it's New Zealand's most prolific startup accelerator. So we work with, I don't know how many founders per year, but we've got 4 batches every year of about 15. So what's that, around 50 or 60 companies. So I sit with them as an operating partner and an entrepreneur in residence. And that's sort of part generalist, part specialist in product. I mentioned earlier, there's this horse race between the business and the product. So a lot of it is just kind of understanding for each company is all different because they've got this different dynamic between their ability to start a business, build a team, understand their legal regulatory requirements, all that piece, and then building a product. Who are they building it for? What's the priority? How are they going to launch it? How are they going to know whether it's doing well? How are they going to know what to change? So that whole range of generalists and specialists startup piece focusing on product. And I get to work with like founders every day and just figure out, where they are, what's their current, point of friction, where's the area where that's causing them not to launch and go faster, and just, breaking that down into how are we gonna move past that and get, get to the next step for them. And it's so fun. I love it.
And seeing so many startups, what do you think are the most common kind of product pitfalls that those early startups fall into, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah. One that I see a lot is like spending too much time and or money on the MVP. So again, like I mentioned earlier, this was my biggest finding as a startup founder. I thought that you just went away into a closet for a while, built something, put it in the world, and then sort of like try to optimize how the money came in. But they'll sort of spend all, if they perceive that they could like take a year off and work on this thing, they'll spend 11 and a half of those months building it. And then they'll be like ready to launch it, but they kind of need the money to start coming in. Whereas really it's all about like maybe spend a month building something, launch it, and then, figure out how to make that snowball roll down the hill and grow. So that's the biggest pitfall, because I've seen a lot of founders end up, run out of money or run out of time, and they haven't even got their first market insight yet, because they haven't launched. And it's really hard to build back the momentum from there, because you often find out that you built something that there isn't really urgency to buy, and you actually need to build something different. And what do? There's no money there. So my learnings from that is like, just around figuring out the earliest possible prototype, the cheapest possible test. People are afraid to show their work until it's perfect, but like if it's an important enough pain point, then people will buy it even though it's ugly. They'll buy it even if it takes them a few extra clicks. They'll buy it even though it's in a form of a Google form in a WhatsApp group instead of a downloadable app. You have to get that signal that there's hunger for it. Not just that it's a solution for a problem, but it's a solution for a problem that is painful enough that people will do something to act on. You've got to figure that out before you spend many resources on actually building the thing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and it's an easy mistake to make, right? Because it's an easy excuse for you to tell yourself, oh, it's just because the product is not good enough, and once it's good enough, like we'll have more customers
Yeah.
or more money or whatever
Yeah.
it is.
And that's how our brains work though, right? Like that's how our behavioral science at Kogo, I get to work with an amazing behavioral science team, and they taught me all the biases and all the heuristics and all these amazing terms that I never knew before. And like we really optimize our energy for the things that we can see. And when people think about their company, they think about the screens and the buttons and the product, and it's so easy to just fall in love with that and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. But actually, it's not going to have much, it might just look really good, but it's not going to have that commercial value. It's not going to have that, impact on the community or the world if it doesn't actually have interactions in a meaningful way with the people who use it.
To what point do you need to start thinking about, okay, I've done my rapid experimentation. I can see the signs that there's something there. When do you need to consider the long view of your product decisions and really be more careful about the product that you're building?
Yeah, I think it comes back to some of that thinking just around like decisiveness, but also like smart bets. So, assuming that you've done some early prototyping, it's all about what kind of signals are you getting? Are they valid? Are they reliable? It's not just that your friends said that they thought it looked pretty good, or you send it to a bunch of people and they said, yeah, I think I would pay for that. These are not reliable signals. Did you actually get people to sign up and pay to be in a WhatsApp group or something, ridiculous where it doesn't see, is there actually a signal? Once that's there, then I think you can start. I think you keep operating that way for as long as possible so that you can keep learning and keep validating that the problem is there. Like, as so long as you're actually, if you've got an MVP out there, it should be able to like get a job done. It should be able to create an outcome. And if that outcome is valuable enough, then probably people will continue to seek it out and adopt it, even though it's, paper and string. But then I think once you've got enough of a body of insights there, use that data and start to design, a more scalable version. I think it's really tricky if you don't have some technical capability on the startup team. And that doesn't have to be like on a senior software engineer with 20 years of experience. It can just be somebody who's willing to learn low-code tools. Somebody who's willing to, figure it out. Ideally, it's not an agency that you paid 50 grand to for your MVP and they want 50 grand to do your next iteration, because that's going to be a really hard road. But, somebody with enough technical capability to start thinking, okay, we've got this, 200 people are using it. We can't really support anymore because we're having to like manually add them to this WhatsApp group or, this kind of thing. I'm using WhatsApp because I've used a lot of early versions now of products where I'm just in a WhatsApp group and I'm like, oh, this is fine. I didn't expect that it would just be a WhatsApp group, but it's a WhatsApp group and a Friday Zoom call, and I love it. I'll keep coming to this. So whatever it is, you need somebody to technically bounce ideas off of, like, okay, like how might we create this outcome in a more scalable way? How might we go from this to the next phase, which is, we want to be able to bring in 500 people. Okay, well then I think we need to have a web app. Okay, what's the, how might we create the same outcome with a web app? Whatever the case may be. So I think it's a combination of definitely optimizing for continuing to create that outcome and assuming that even that second iteration isn't going to be your final product. Even the second one is going to be whatever version of, WhatsApp group 2.0. But like even that, you're going to learn a lot because you're going to be opening up to more people, getting deeper insights. So I think the scrappier you can stay at the start, the better.
You mentioned before about making sure that you have a long view on product building. So do you have any examples of a time where you've seen somebody take like a very short-term view on a product that they were building, and that it actually was really bad long term, but at the time maybe not that obvious of a decision to make. And yeah, what did you learn from that?
Yeah. I mean, the one that I can't even not say, because it has happened so many times, is you start out, everything's great. You've got your insights, you're building your product, you've got a bit of a plan, you have a general idea of your ideal customer, but then you get a random inbound message from the big fish, and they want to pay you like $500,000 to build something that's like not quite your product, but like kind of similar, but and you haven't paid yourself in 2 years, and you just think, well, okay, I'll take this money and we'll just. So I think that really short-term decision to kind of like ignore everything else, pivot over here, and like build something a bit bespoke for this big, potential, this big client that doesn't really fit your ideal customer profile, but like they want to pay. I think that at that point, unless something really special happens, like you've become an agency, and it's very unlikely that anybody else is going to buy this bespoke product that you've just built. And you're also now tied to really hoping that that client is going to pay you to do another special thing. So I think it doesn't often happen as clearly as that. People still just they've got their Trello board or their HubSpot pipeline, and they've got their cards for their customers. And, this big fish comes in, they're just there. They're swimming in the pipeline. You don't realize that it's sort of like a whale or a shark among the fish, or you just move it through, but like that one's worth $500,000. So you prioritize it. And looking back, you realize that you spent all your effort just trying to build their thing, trying to figure out what they need, trying to like bend your product to meet their needs, but now you've like bent it and it's unrecognizable to everybody else. So you start to ignore them. It's only in retrospect you realize that like, yeah, you might have got that money, but now like your only hope at future revenue is charging them for more feature. And at that point, it's just not a very fun company to have. You're no longer sort of having the agency to innovate. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. And some people might go down the road and be very successful. But it's definitely not been like a startup success story that I've seen.
Right. You would almost have to go a little bit in that direction, but not be far away enough from the path that you intended to take that you wouldn't be able to kind of merge.
Yeah. It's another story if you go, oh, cool, we got this inbound. It's really valuable. Like, I wonder if there's a market there, and then sort of do some discovery in this new market and realize, oh my gosh, yeah, we could pivot, like that's a different thing. That's where like, okay, we've actually considered this, we've done a pivot, and now we're treating this as a new market. Often that big fish is just treated like a slightly different customer, and not acknowledging that it's a completely different market.
So also making sure that it's not just a completely different thing that you're doing. That makes a lot of sense. Hey, I had a question about your transition from being a PM to being the CPO. I don't think that maybe a lot of people that are in a product role quite realize how their role changes over time from being deep into the detail to being more high level.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone if they were asking you, what will change about my role the most if I keep transitioning into, head of product and then CPO?
For me, this was like a good transition because I'd had a lot of leadership experience in my sort of earlier career. So it kind of felt natural. I know a lot of people at that product management level are unsure about, there's these two paths, which are sort of like continuing as an individual contributor and be, going to like group product manager, VP of product, that kind of thing, versus like transitioning into leadership. My transition was on that leadership track versus the IC track. And yeah, for me, it was really natural, and I really loved it because it was just taking product to that level of abstraction of like being a piece within a system. So I mentioned earlier that concept of the first team. So my first team became the exec team. my core team became, the heads of sales, customer success. And for me, that was really important because it kind of took it to that level of like building an operating model that was an efficient machine to create the outcomes that the company wanted. There's also some product advocacy there. I don't think that product for product's sake is very valuable. Trying to advocate for, a hyper product led culture in a company where that's not getting a lot of traction is maybe in the long term, I don't know, but it's not going to get that year's goals done. So it was really about like trying to collaborate and trying to understand the other teams, trying to understand at that full company strategy level, which was really, really, I really enjoyed because I really appreciate being at that kind of like systems, very zoomed out view. And then the other thing is just around people management. So I basically just became a team leader, people manager. I got to really focus on understanding the people on my team and advocating for their growth. It was a really good shift that I definitely got a lot out of.
And when being involved with product, what was your biggest challenge that you faced?
You mean like at that as a CPO or just in general in product?
Just in general, any phase of your kind of product journey, when you were building a new feature or you're thinking about, hey, this is the piece of software that we need to build, whatever it was, like what do you think was like a constant challenge that you had?
Yeah, I mean, my constant challenge was that like I'm a lifelong learner, growth mindset, all that, and I never worked for the big name product companies where you go and learn product. I was always just doing that role in a company that, where even as a newbie, like I knew more about it than anybody in the company. So I was always making it up as I went along, but then trying to like learn on my own. And my biggest challenge was that in trying to learn what I needed to learn to like do, tactically do what I wanted to do, try to build a better product org in the company, try to build, all of these things, I didn't feel like anything ever applied to my situation. So, and I was largely working in B2B SaaS, which is like pretty common. A lot of the time working in enterprise, which has its own, challenges, and also almost exclusively, often working pre-product market fit. And I just like, I would just look and look and look and look. And I just always felt so frustrated that, I didn't feel like any of the sort of, popular blogs or frameworks or things like would really work in my situation. And that was really frustrating because I just like, I wanted to do a good job, wanted to sort of be a transformative agent in whatever situation that I was in. And I just always felt like it was, they're written for bigger companies, like SaaS B2C companies. I don't know, like I always found it really hard to learn other than by doing, which has been really informative and really fun, but also like a bit slower than I would have liked.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's nothing better than trial by fire and actually doing it to learn. Yeah, and frameworks are not always useful, right? Because they're quite general and they don't apply to your situation. So I can definitely relate to that. Try to use some frameworks that didn't work so well in the past.
Like, I mean, I'm just thinking about, working with enterprise sales teams, like they're often only getting paid a base salary, and they're like highly motivated to get their deals. And often that whether it's true or not, like the perception is that those deals are hinging on the ability to promise a new feature, or, the ability to give a roadmap with, exact dates or whatever. And like, you just feel like you're holding so much pressure for some outcomes in the company. And then when you go to try and, find some resources, do some upskilling to make sure that you're doing that well, it's sort of like, it doesn't apply. And it just, it feels like a really high stakes situation. Now I would know, how to approach it all. But I think for a really early career, there's not many fields where in your early career, you can't just sort of like upskill pretty quickly and be able to sort of achieve different outcomes. But I think product has that level of complexity that A, it's connected to everything, but B, it's so new and so complex in its application that it does often still depend on just that person's ability to, have good instincts and adapt. And that can be really fun, but it can also be really hard.
For sure. It's more of an art than a science, right? Last question. At Dummy, we're all about, embracing failure as a way to learn. So for every podcast guest, I always like to ask, what's your biggest product failure that you ever experienced, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I can definitely think of one really, really, really big sale, really, really big deal that sort of straddled a big product strategy decision. So leading up to it, these sales cycles are like a year or more. So, it's a lot of time passing, a lot of change happening during the deal. You can't just give a roadmap at the beginning and then have it be true another year later. I definitely, we sort of had a bit of a roadmap going up to it. And then at the exec level, the strategy changed, and it was sort of my role to, enforce or, execute on this new strategy. And it meant that what we had promised to this prospect, we would no longer deliver. And at the time, I just took a really objective line and said, well, that's the new strategy. Sorry. And in this company, even though the sales would sort of report up to the CEO, it was still a very close relationship with product and sales, where they basically come and say, can I promise this? Can I sell this? And we'd say, yeah, sure. Or no, you can't. And I held a really close, really hard line and was like, no, there's this new strategy. There's no way, and from our perspective, it's like, well, the strategy goes down the toilet the second that we start promising things outside of it. So we took a really hard line, and we lost the deal. And in retrospect, of course, the company ended up flexing for so many other deals down the road, smaller deals, because just whatever, because enterprise sales. And I really wondered whether I could have played more of a role in that deal of being more pragmatic and more, more collaborative. It would have been a game changer for the company. And I still don't know what I would have done, but I know that it was my no that lost that deal. And it haunts me because it was a really big one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting lesson to learn early on as well. You have to be flexible to change things. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Christina. It's been really awesome to have you on the podcast. Learned a lot today about product and scaling and going to different geographies. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun. You had really good questions.
Thank you. Okay, see you later.
Take care.
Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening. We release new episodes every 2 weeks, so make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts so you don't miss a new episode. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.